Hi, I'm Sabrina.
Hi, I'm Diana.
And we're here to talk
about
D&D.
D&D.
More specifically, we are going to talk about the races.
The races of Dungeons and Dragons. Let's see.
Which is a huge, wide variety of things.
No, let's see. In the booklet set, in the player's handbook.
Okay, Mother, you're showing off.
It says elves, halflings, dwarves, and other.
And that's it.
They don't even mention men.
Not humans?
No.
As we see hold it up again. In the very first supplements for Dungeons and Dragons, which we have right here.
They looked like this.
That's the very first. In comparison to the latest of the Dungeons and Dragons handbook, which is this big, heavy thing, you can see the comparisons. But originally, that was the first supplements. And as she just said...
I have them all.
As she just said, were only 3 races. 4 races?
There were dwarves.
Dwarves.
Elves.
Elves.
Halflings.
Halflings.
Because you can't say hobbit.
That's a copyrighted word.
And then it says other.
Other.
There is no reason that the players cannot be allowed to play as virtually anything.
As we've learned.
So today we thought we would discuss the races of the players' handbooks and stories about them and how to either encourage them or not encourage them. If you're a beginning player or a beginning DM, we thought, the heck, the first thing that you really talk about
are the
races of your characters.
Uh-huh. After all, characters.
After all, characters.
Yeah. Well, we have this first edition of this edition of the Player's Handbook.
5e, the latest.
The 5e.
Of this, of the time we recorded.
Of the time we are recording, this is the latest of the base book. There are other books that add to this, and other races will be in those books. So if you see one of your favorites not in this book, it was probably in one of the bonus books.
And we could certainly talk about it, and you could certainly research it online.
Mm-hmm. And at the end, we're going to talk about some peculiar races that we've managed to make up on the fly as we went.
We're going to talk about races.
Races.
Having different kinds of races gives you different abilities. Mm-hmm. First, your GM should decide where they want to fall on their races set. Mm-hmm. I like elves. I like dragons. You can't be a dragon. No, you can't be a dragon. But
I'm insulted.
Well, yes, you get to talk about how your characters can be dragons. But you can be elves. I like elves. I encourage people to be elves. I have a lot of elf lore. I have a lot of elf interaction that encourages you in this direction. There are, of course, all the other races and more that you can be. But if somebody comes to me and says, I want to play this, hold it a second.
Be wary of how crazy your pick of your race is. And it will really depend on how much your GM is willing to put up with whatever you custom build.
And a lot of that can be, what kind of game am I trying to play here? Mm-hmm. Because if you're playing a kaiju game, having something large and amazing and kind of cardboard cutout, I will get it, Hulk smash.
If you're going like a video game sort of thing, you want everything to be balanced and well placed. You want your DPS, you want your tank, you want your long range.
Right. So the idea of what is it that you are introducing into the game should be, well, what is the game going to be good with? Mm-hmm. If you have an open game that has a lot of movement and the ability of putting in an entire background. I made up this whole thing.
1 second, I'm getting a call from Father.
Better take that.
Mm-hmm. Sorry about that. We were suddenly interrupted through dinner.
It was an invitation to dinner, and one does not accept somebody taking you out to dinner.
Who says no to that?
So we will have our black cat Indy, who might be more than happy just to strut around and about, because he's Mr. Friendly right now.
Well, we are going to get back on the topic of D&D races.
D&D races.
Yes.
And as I already said, dwarves, elves, halflings, because they're not hobbits.
Right.
And anything else that the DM might want to...
Note that there was no humans, because humans are boring.
Humans are boring.
But of course, it's the roundabout class, since nowadays they gave you that buff. Since we're on the topic, let's talk about humans.
And my thought is we're going to go through, the Player's Handbook number 5E.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about humans.
Let's talk about humans. Humans are dull.
Humans are dull. But in recent years, in the effort to try and make humans less dull...
Because they want you to play humans. The whole book was actually graded on the idea of, well, everybody will play a human because it won't occur to them to play anything else. Mm-hmm. So, humans. And then nobody played humans. So they went, all right, let's give them... Buffs. Let's say they get more points in... noticing, or what do they have more points in? Everything. Experience. There's all sorts of things.
They get extra modifiers, so people get duped into playing humans. But it's a good place to start for people who are not used to playing Dungeons and Dragons.
And if you're being drawn to a character, its personality. Mm-hmm. You can have a goth human as well as a goth elf, or a goth dwarf, or a goth halfling.
That'd be cool.
It would. Oh, humans, they're so lucky they get to die. And then the elves are like, oh, yes. And the humans are like, wait, hold it. Can we talk about this? So the whole idea of it's your character. What are you going to build into it? You don't necessarily need to min-max it, but there's a lot of bonuses to be human these days.
So for you min-maxers out there, humans are not too bad of a chart.
Humans are a way to go.
All right, and now let's continue on with the first choice in this book, the dwarf.
The dwarf.
Now, I know some people might be confused for you veterans out there, because I know there's a bunch of other classes that start with A's and all this stuff. But in this book, at least the base book, it starts with dwarf.
Dwarf. These are the what they consider the core races. Mm. If you're running a fantasy campaign and you are not attempting to limit yourself with the races that you can have, depending upon what it is that you choose to throw for your game, dwarves are essential. Mm-hmm.
What's your opinions on dwarves?
I like them. Nobody plays them, but I like them.
Well, not in your campaign.
Not in my campaign. But, good, solid understanding what a catacomb is like, and oh my gosh, the ceiling is going to fall down on us. You can't beat a good dwarf.
Dwarves are usually people for underground and gathering treasures.
That's right. They're miners, they're makers, and I had in my game, because we had a whole kingdom of dwarves and it flooded, and what I did is I made Jamaican dwarves. And they had the corn rolls, and they loved to dive. Ooh. Because caves often flood, and it was this entire clan, or hearth, mm-hmm. in my case, there was an entire hearth of dwarves that were like, no, somebody has to be able to understand how to swim, where to get into, to find where the gems are deep in the watery caves. Mm-hmm. And all of my players were like, you could do that? I'm like, yes, man. I know, stereotypical, but I loved it.
Mm-hmm. It's a fun thing to play with.
It is.
Technically, it does say that there are different types of dwarfs, but that usually depends if you're a hill dwarf or a mountain dwarf.
Mountain dwarf, and I had water dwarves.
So that's a fun thing to think about.
And indeed, in the monster section, you will find the dark dwarves, the Dugar, and they are the underground for the drow. Because if you have elves underground, well, dwarves belong underground. What else have we got?
Elf is next on this list.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, elves. Coming from Tolkien, elves are cool. Well, we'll just leave it at that. Elves are cool.
Elves are cool.
Elves are best.
Elves are, I hate to say it, a strangely generic sort of thing, because for every plane, there is an elf equivalent.
That's because they're cool.
That is true.
If you go through my sketchbook, and I have a lot of my characters in my sketchbook, if you look carefully, I don't draw a lot of humans. They all have little pointed ears. And I'm like, who's that guy? It's obviously an elf. Just because I like them, and I think that they're more interesting, and I think that the immortal aspects of their lifespan really give you a lot of ability to do things. And as you said, you can find them in every plane. You can find them in every places. You've got sea elves and wood elves and city elves and drow and
high elves and dark elves
and all this other stuff. So I think they're a mainstay of the fantasy game. If you're running a fantasy game, Dungeons and Dragons.
Now let's go back to that drow? Because I know you handle your dwarves differently.
I do.
Tell us about that.
Black elves are cool, and I didn't want to do the same thing that everybody does and go, Black elves,
evil, spooky.
They are spooky elves that live in the dark. Well, yeah, my drow live in the darkness because there's a demon interlaced with their soul. A demon was conjured up at a time when, oh my God, everything erupted into, demon crazy. The one time the gates of hell opened up and the demons went, oh my God, the gates are open, and poured in. And then they shut the gates, but the demons were still all out. Mm-hmm. And they managed to meld with an elf. And the baby that was born was accepted by the clan father, who's like, well, it's an elf, so we're not killing it. But there's a demon within it. And now the demons have very long syllables, and it splits its syllables. And every time a baby is born into my drow, they have some of the syllables. And those syllables are their soul names. And they're the ones that they hide. But it also turns out that some of the elves are the personifications of parts of the demons. So that there is one that has the voice of the demon. And there's one that's the brains. Guess who? And you could do so much with the drow. I have the personifications of the apocalypse.
Only one interpretation of the drows.
Yes.
You can still do whatever you wish with them. Or, again, you make them spooky.
Spooky, dark, mysterious, dangerous. Because certainly mine still are. Dangerous. But it's how do you want them to be dangerous? How are they going to fit into your game?
Yes.
By all means, take the description in the book, do it at the beginning of your game if you're just starting, and then feel free to change it later. Oh no, that's what everybody believes. But in reality...
Elves have 5 pages dedicated to them in this book.
There's a lot. I've got the Tolkien Elven Dictionary, and there's a lot of interesting histories. And certainly some of the books, the fantasy books that you can read, deal with human lifespan in love with an elven lifespan.
You can deal with... You can bring up ElfQuest if you're feeling so spicy.
Indeed, because then you've got the little throwbacks kind of things. Very neat.
Very unique. But that is many things that you can do with elves.
Don't just do it's an elf, so it's...
Oh yeah, they're pretty and kind of whimsy.
And they're snooty, and they don't like anybody.
So
because, and my thought is, it's really hard to say, oh, he was my really good friend, and I only knew him for 75 years, and then he died. Mm-hmm. Well, all the other elves are like, they're like puppies. You should really not interact with them that way. But you don't have to.
Yeah, much like how dwarves are often seen as gruff and tumble.
We drink a lot. No, you don't have to.
It's not just that. You could have Jamaican water
dwarves, man. We dive, and then we find everything deep in the dark. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that idea. I do.
See? Have fun. Spin off things. Okay, next on the list. Halflings.
Okay, so back in the early days of Dungeons & Dragons, you couldn't say hobbits because the copyrights were still going on and there was estates to deal with. Mm-hmm. And they knew darn well that this was the people that they were coming to interact with. The fantasy lovers read Tolkien. You can't say hobbits. Mm-hmm. But every time anybody says halfling, I just go hobbits. In my game, I have hobbits. If somebody called them halflings, it'd be like, oh, that's so cute. It's like saying high elf, or it's like saying... It's just a descriptive.
It's just a thing.
The people who own Dungeons and Dragons try a lot to make halflings seem very different. Mm-hmm. So that for a while they had fuzzy feet, and then they didn't. And for a while their proportions were like the head was huge.
In this picture you can see there's tiny, tiny feet on this girl.
Tiny, tiny feet, and they're... Yes, we have a friendly kitty.
Okay, continue.
So it's like they say, oh yes, but they like all the same things that hobbits do. They fill the same space that hobbits do. Mm-hmm. They are tough little guys that nobody expects to do something great.
Makes the best rogues.
Yeah, but you try and make them into like an anti-paladin and your players just laugh. I tell you, I had a bunch of them and they were all like, ah! They did not take them seriously. I'm sure they were sorry after the little hobbits kicked their asses. But, again...
That's the tale with hobbits, I mean halflings.
Halflings. it's the classic trope. If you want to use it, do so.
Go for it. And make sure you eat a lot, because halflings eat a lot.
We had one character who constantly had a sandwich in their
Very important.
backpack.
And then there's the human, but we've already established the human.
Humans are good. Humans should be your baseline.
Although there's also the idea of half-breeds, like a half-elf or half-orcs and whatnot. And that usually either starts with a human being laid with other creatures. If you're spicy, you can also do half-dragons or half-gnomes or half-things, who knows. But we're going to talk about that in a different way.
Yeah, you can have half-elf, half kobold if you like. You know, it's like,
if you're feeling spicy enough, there's enough crazy combos you can do with elves.
There's my backstory.
And humans, for you mid-maxers out there, usually half human species do get some bonus stats. So you can have the bonus stat of a human, but also have the traits of whatever creature you want.
I have a friend who was running a campaign, and it was after the Holocaust campaign, and for some reason the elves were delicious. That was their description. The elves are delicious. And one of the players was playing an elf. And every place that he went, there were people going, how much for the elf? They're delicious. And there were like recipes and things that he had to deal with all the time.
Oh, good
with
Lord.
People going, well, I'll let you go if you let me have a bite of the elf. And it was just one of those.
You said you didn't do horror well, didn't you?
No. I didn't do it. It was these people. My friend, it's Andy and Natasha. Andy's the one with the elf who was tasty.
Still.
Yeah. So,
all right.
Do what you need to.
Next on the list, Dragonborns. And I got a bone to pick with Dragonborns.
Go ahead.
All right. So, in my personal way that I see Dragonborns are now at the point that they are their own species.
Yes.
Like a drake or a wyvern, Dragonborns are their own species.
Dragons, wyverns, different things.
Dragons and wyverns are different things.
Don't get me started.
We'll talk about that in a different episode. We'll have a whole episode where we rant about dragons. But right now, this is about Dragonborns.
Dragonborn.
Because there's a lot of people that I know who will do the whole... Dragonborns are obviously when a dragon and a human
love each other very much.
No, that creates what I consider a half-dragon.
Right.
Which is the creature that usually have the wings and the whatnots. But a Dragonborn are their own separate thing. At least in my headcanon.
And mine too.
Here you go. And you're free to do, you can keep the mating of the Dragonborns all you want. But that is my personal opinion of Dragonborn.
When it was back in the 80s and nobody knew any better, I made up a race class because I liked race classes, and I made up.
Hold on, let's hold on our created species until the very end.
Excellent, go for it.
All right, because we do have species we want to talk about that we made, but
put a pin in that.
We'll put a pin in that. Next up, the gnome.
Gnomes.
I love gnomes.
I have no use for them.
I find them quite interestingly weird because they're always the underdog. Nobody really suspects gnomes. Nobody takes gnomes seriously.
Exactly. Like me.
But that's the secret trick, you know. And that's how you get under people's skin. In the rare cases that I get to play a game,
Oh, you get to play a game?
I know, so rare it does. But in the rare cases, one of my favorites is to make a chaotic, neutral gnome cleric. Who will heal you,
Everybody
but
likes
you have
the
to
clerics.
pay her in order to heal you. Because you're the dips who didn't bring up any other healer onto this mess. I was the only choice. So this is all you're gonna get, buddy.
Do you want to be healed or not?
And that's how I play.
And my God loves me for that.
You know, I'm a very good patron.
See, in my opinion, we started and they started looking for other classes to add into the mix because everybody's like, well, I don't want to be the usual thing. I want to be something different. I want to be something unusual. Mm-hmm. And once you start with dwarves, because now you've shrunk, and hobbits, and now you've shrunk, the idea is let us add in some other fantasy races that are instantly recognizable as, oh, gnomes. Oh, I know what a gnome is. Back when you said kobolds kobolds used to be this human kind of thing, and then they went dog-like, and then they went lizard-like. And
for those who didn't see our episode about the spider centaurs,
yes.
the driders, we talked about kobolds.
Kobolds.
And we'll talk about kobolds
You
more soon.
can't get away from them. Gosh darn it.
I'm so sorry. But yeah, kobolds were originally just the German version of goblin. Not dragon related at all, but somehow it ended up being dragon related. Do with that information what you will. Now draw your kobolds in a little lederhosen and drinking beers.
Pretzels. They should have pretzels.
There you go. But anyways, that's what I like about gnomes.
And I like them because they fill out your fantasy race set. And there are people that are always looking for something unusual because they've played this and they've done that and they've done the other thing. So yeah, let's add in some usual things.
Now, I'm passing over the half-elf because we already talked about the half-elf. But you know that there's whole information about it in the book.
Yeah, if there's 4 pages for elves, there's another 2 pages for half-elves.
There you go. But we also want to talk about the half-orc.
Half-orcs.
Because these have more interesting role-playing aspects to them. Because usually, half-orcs never come out of really happy relationships. There's always some kind of story and hardships behind being half-orc.
And you want something with power, and you want something that's kind of monstrous in your
for all those
race
monster hovers out there. And it depends on how you treat your orcs too, because that's another species that some people will either treat as grr, monster, or an interesting complex society.
Right.
That depends on you.
And it depends on their origin, because orcs and we know how half-orcs have their origin, but in Tolkien's universe, in the movies, they're all created. And in the books, if you go back into the minutia of them, they too are a created thing. So the idea of reproduction, we didn't see any female orcs in any of all of this. So what the deal? So a lot of what you decide.
Although recently there's a huge spread of female orcs and goblins and such. That's a real recent boom as of late.
Oh sure, there's also the wheelchair people, but it's like, what do you want to include in your set of rules? What do you want in the scope of the people of your game that your players are allowed to get into? I love half-orcs. I think they're cool. I got a couple of fairly powerful.
One of my NPCs in my game currently is Jean-Claude the Pirate. And he's a beautiful swashbuckling man. And he's a human. But his entire crew are half-orcs. Because half-orcs are a hearty, meaty bunch. And usually it's hard to find work as a half-orc. But
and in this case, if you have to run up the yardarm, go ahead. You're a half-orc.
There you go. So he employs very much mainly half-orcs and his crew because he knows that they're a worthy folk.
And that's where your characters, if your players are starting, if your players are new to this, and I don't know, because a lot of them will come from different games, maybe? I don't know. Maybe they're just young. The idea of presenting a young man with a half-orc character will make him a whole lot happier than a hobbit or an elf.
All depends. Little boys want to play as monsters.
Yeah, and this is your chance.
Yeah. Or those who identify as boys. Anybody who wants.
Speaking of monsters,
the last species in this book,
in the Player's Handbook, 5e,
in the main book is the tiefling or tiefling.
Tieflings.
Tieflies, which are basically demon creatures. I always forget the complete origin because it often changes.
According to the book, they're half demon.
Much like the half orc.
They'll say there's infernal in their blood. A long time ago, because my game is old and I established a lot of things when I was old or when I was younger, and I had established that demons cannot reproduce. They might be able to mess you up, but they cannot reproduce. They're demons. They can't split apart and be 2 demons. They don't reproduce. It's one of the things that makes them angry all the time. So once they started saying, well, tieflings are infernal and they are, demon-like things, and I'm like, no, they reproduce. They cannot be in my game because it's been established that way. Now we have creatures that are tieflings, and they say, yes, we're infernal, because that's what the myth that they wish to put out there. And other than that, they don't talk about what they are or who they are. And I have other things that I need to do with demons if they're going to try and reproduce, which they can't. So,
in my interpretation, my version of the tiefling is much the same as the Dragonborn.
Right.
That tieflings are actually a member of the demon clans, but they have collected to the point that they are now their own species. And now they are accepted onto the surface world.
Right.
However, they are still looked upon in suspicion because they are still have the demonic blood within them.
And if you read a lot of the Drizzt books, from TSR, here I am back at TSR again. I'm sorry, TSR is the company that owned Dungeons and Dragons before Wizards of the Coast.
There you go.
And a lot of the books that they put out had the, I must fight against my internal nature kind of thing going on, and tieflings are a register from that. So if you're looking for something that is an evil character, but is not, eschew my demon instincts, well, now you've got somebody fighting internally with themselves. They also have some nice stats if you're a min-maxer looking for some nice stats.
Good for the role player and the min-maxer.
Right.
Good choice.
I think that the book has a whole lot of people and creatures that are nicely balanced, so don't worry. These are the regulars.
These are the properly balanced ones tested by the company themselves.
Right.
However, again, you are free to choose whatever you want. And I know for a fact that we are missing a few of the more favorite ones from the internet, but we are going by what is in this book.
And there are other books that will
Plenty
tell
of
you,
other books.
oh, here's a new race.
Maybe we should make a part 2 about the other races.
The other races.
So
there's internet things.
Yes. So if you have a race that you would like us to talk about that we didn't already mention, please feel free to leave it in the comments.
Also, if you're a DM, you can also, if it's okay with you, put your parameters around something that you've seen in the movies and say, well, gee, I had a guy running an executor for a while. We killed it as quickly as we could.
Well, you killed it as quickly as you could.
I did, because all the guy wanted to do was go executor, executor, while he was trying to talk to people.
Of course.
Can't have
How
that at the
he
table.
managed to roll up a playable Pokemon in the game is something magical. But the fact that he managed to roll up a Pokemon into the game is a statement on all of this.
So it's you can do the wild thing, you can do the steady thing. If you go by the rules, you don't have to worry about balance.
Yes. And while there's plenty of other races that we could easily poke at, and I desperately think that we're going to need a part 2.
We'll probably need a part 2.
But for now, remember when we were mentioning Dragonborns and you were mentioning a race that you developed?
Back in the early days, because I'm dragon crazy, duh. I made up my own race. We published a little supplement about it, and we released it through Tritech Games, and it was, we called them Krish, and they were of the dragon race, and they had 2 thumbs on their hands, and they had unusual weapons, and they had wings, and depending on what you rolled, you might get a fire breath, you might get a flight kind of power. It was kind of different, and it was progenitor. Not that anybody from Wizards of the Coast saw it. It's just that everybody went, why can't we have dragon characters? Well, you can't have a whole dragon, but maybe you can have a dragon kind of person. And it seems to be pretty popular.
As many experienced DMs would say, letting players play as dragons can be hard if you're not very careful about how you set that up. I'm currently running a game where all the players are dragons, but I've had to set up a lot of rules and a lot of ways to keep things fair for everybody else in that world.
Yeah, and we should definitely talk about fun stuff like that, because
and
I don't play in this game.
I will talk about that in another episode of how you too could play as a dragon in your game. But talk it through your DM first. And if you are the DM, well, I'll soon have a written stuff for that.
It's possible to do anything. It's your imagination, your storytelling along with your players at the table. We're all supposed to be having a good time. And if it doesn't ruin everybody at the table, executor, if it doesn't ruin their fun and you think it'll be kind of cool, You just got to worry about where it balances out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's articles talking about it on the internet, or you
Plenty
could take
more.
you could take examples from the book and then say, well, it's like an elf in these ways, so I'll give it these pluses.
Yeah.
There's ways of doing it.
Old Spice released a race or a class called the Gentlemen.
Ooh.
But the fact that Old Spice, the company, made a supplement for Dungeons and Dragons proves that anybody can make supplements. Or
I've also seen those motors. They're like centaurs, only with motorcycles.
That exists.
Anyway, there's a zillion things out
Absolutely.
there.
Tell us in the comments what races you want to hear about next. We will make a
happy.
lovely list of all the ones that we missed and maybe a few bonus ones if you find them.
We'll get the ones that are TSR, Wizards of the Coast approved, D&D approved,
Yes.
and then we'll find other ones on the internet that were like, this one's cool.
Yes.
Don't let them be a celestial. I am a celestial and I can do anything. And all the little kobolds are like, well, we're just going to stand back here while that player kicks everybody's ass because...
You do realize in the next episode we're probably going to have to talk about kobolds, right?
Goodbye, everybody.
My name's Sabrina.
I'm Diana.
And we just talked about races for a good half an hour.
Bye-bye.